Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm Ayan Halfman. We are now over 8 months into the war against Hamas in Gaza. In just the last week, we've lost around a dozen soldiers. Fires are raging on our northern border from Hezbollah rockets and other projectiles. Houthis are targeting ships in the Red Sea. A poll from a Ramallah-based think tank indicates the Palestinians want Hamas to stay in power and still support the massacre that the organization carried out on October 7th. Another poll by a Jerusalem-based think tank shows that Israelis want the IDF to attack Hezbollah with full force, escalating our actions on yet another front. The Prime Minister has disbanded the war cabinet. Around 120 hostages remain in Hamas custody, and the public still lacks a clear vision for what happens on our southern border the day after. As a proud Zionist who believes in God and the Jewish people's right to a sovereign country in our biblical homeland, I remain hopeful that the tides will turn. However, as an Israeli living under the shadow of war, I have to admit it's not easy. On today's show, we're going to discuss some of the most pressing questions of the day with two top experts who will share their insights on managing the increasingly complex situation in Israel. I'd like to welcome MK Sharon Haskell, who is also co-chair of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus and the UNRWA Caucus, among other hats. Welcome, Sharon.
Hi, Mayan. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Of course. I'd also like to welcome former MK Dr. Einat Wilf. Einat is a well-known author and thought leader on all topics relating to Israeli society. Welcome, Einat.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump right in and ask this first question. The IDF said just yesterday that half of Hamas in Rafah is beaten. The Army's PR makes it look like we're winning this war. But several analysts have said that as soon as we leave one area, Hamas returns. And it's unclear how much of a victory there really is. Moreover, as I mentioned, the Ramallah-based poll of Palestinians, they found out just last week that 50% of Palestinians believe Hamas is winning the war. Well, which one is it? Einat, can you take that question?
Certainly. It begins with, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that we did in the beginning, which is define the war and its goals in a limited way. Counterintuitively, you would think that having limited goals would make it easier to achieve. But I think it's exactly the opposite. By defining it as a war against Hamas, intended to basically degrade Hamas and make it unable for Hamas to rule, we behaved as if the United States in December of 1941 would have declared war against the kamikazes, saying that that's the only problem. In doing so, we actually allowed the big lie to fester, which is that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians. And as you mentioned in the poll, not only is Hamas hugely supported, not only is October 7th hugely supported, Hamas represents in the deepest sense the ethos of the Palestinian people as a whole, of complete negation and war against the existence of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. So the war should have been defined as a diplomatic total war against the Palestinian ideology of the negation of Jewish sovereignty, basically making it clear that after October 7th, this is not something that we can allow to stand. But making it such a limited goal, we've actually made it nearly impossible to win, precisely because of what the soldiers describe. We will kill a few trained Hamas murderers, others will come in their place. We will leave, they'll come back because they are living among a supportive population that supports their goal of the destruction of Jewish sovereignty. So we've actually made a massive mistake in defining the goals of the war in such a limited way, and in a way that is actually based on a terrible lie that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians, which it very much does.
Thank you, because that actually really relates to my next question, which is that this war, as you said, is against radicalism, against terrorism, and that is why we are fighting a war not on one front, but really on two. Let's talk about the other fact that we have 80,000 Israelis still displaced from their home in the north. The rockets and the other projectiles are burning up our fields on the northern border. What should Israel be doing about this? Sharon, you start, and then Einat, you take the question.
A couple of things. I want to say one thing about the war itself and how it's advancing in Gaza, and it's important to say, if we really want to eliminate Hamas, this is not just a military victory. It has to be also a civilian victory, because Hamas is a terrorist organization that doesn't just have a military wing. It has a whole political and civilian operation that controls Palestinians, control their lives, and through that control, it radicalizes youth and recruits them to the terrorist organization and to the military wing. So it is an achievement that just yesterday Israel has taken over the Philadelphia crossing, which is a major artery of money that goes into Hamas. It is an achievement that half of their terrorists are eliminated. It's not enough. There's still a way to go. But without addressing the civilian issue, taking the power, the civilian power from Hamas so they cannot control the population, the military achievement doesn't really mean much, because it means that after the war, Hamas will be able to recruit more terrorists, to gain more power, and to go back to its power, including military power. So it goes hand to hand. And when we speak about the day after, it means that we speak on how to eliminate Hamas civilian control, which goes hand to hand with UNRWA, because Hamas is controlling the population through the United Nations organization called UNRWA. Okay? This organization gives the power to Hamas to have that civilian control on the education system, jobs.
Sharon, I want to stop you about UNRWA. Sharon, I'm going to stop you on UNRWA because we're going to get to that soon, but I want to go back to this question about the North. I want you to tell me, what are we supposed to do about the North? Because we've got Hezbollah in the North, Hamas in the South, and there are people displaced from their homes, and I want to know how we handle it.
Okay, so obviously it's very complicated, and I think the government hasn't handled it properly. I think, and we've stated that as well, when Gallant suggested in the beginning of the war that we have to address the front as well, the northern front as well, that would have been the right decision to make. They took the wrong decision in concentrating first on the southern border instead on both of them together. Hezbollah is a serious threat. It makes more of a threat than what Hamas opposed on Israel, okay? And Hamas has a lot of weak points as well. It doesn't just mean that we need to fight it on a military base, but also on a civilian base. There's a huge tear inside Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon has literally been taken over by Iran. Iran is occupying Lebanon by its proxy called Hezbollah. And the Lebanese people are suffering from it. They're suffering from it from a civilian point of view. They're suffering it from an economical point of view. Lebanon is in a great economical breaking point. And so unfortunately, Israel is not investing enough power on both of these strategic points to put pressure on Hezbollah. And there is a lot of pressure that we can put on them from internally. If we don't address this problem, it means that hundreds of thousands of people who are refugees in Israel, literally Jewish refugees, Israeli refugees within Israel, will not be able to return to their home. They cannot return to the front, to the north, if they don't have the security that they are going to be protected. And
so I have to say that, Sharon, that's right. The government has failed, and the government is actually having even more problems, because just yesterday, Netanyahu canceled the cabinet when former Minister Benny Gantz stepped down. He resigned from the party, and the talk is that the prime minister made this decision so he did not have to give in to the demand of National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who wanted to join that cabinet. Now, Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant will make decisions, I guess, based on these small ad hoc consultations, maybe some other relevant officials. Eventually, maybe they'll get approval from the wider security cabinet. And Israeli media is saying that Ben-Gvir won't be a part of these consultations either. I need to ask you, Einat first, and then Sharon. I have to understand how this works and how this war is being handled. Who is in charge here? How do we have somebody who is a member of the coalition with a title like National Security Minister But the prime minister doesn't trust him to make security decisions. It's rather unsettling. Einat, what do you think?
I still cannot believe, and this is a moment of great despair, that at the most difficult hour for certainly in the history of the state of Israel since its foundation, for the Jewish people, this is the kind of leadership we have. Clowns, cowards, mediocrities, and I'm being generous when I call them mediocrities. Worse in some aspects, we actually have a government that is actually illegitimate in the sense that it relies on the support of people who are ideologically opposed to defending the state of Israel. Personally, I believe that if you're ideologically opposed under all conditions in any situation to defend the state of Israel, you cannot be a member of its democracy, you cannot vote, and you can certainly not be a member of its government. I would not count the government as having 64 seats. I would remove all the parties that do not participate in Israel's defense. So yes, we are facing one of the greatest challenges to Israel with terrible leadership.
Sharon, what are your thoughts on the subject? Do you agree?
I have to agree with Einat on these many issues. I mean, this is the most inexperienced government, and they do act like a clowns in a circus. Unfortunately, they have no experience. They are incapable of making decisions, and they don't really understand. I mean, many of them did not serve in the IDF. They didn't serve the country in a way that we needed to defend it. I mean, I served as a combat soldier during the times of the Second Intifada. You know, even though I wasn't a big general, I understand the basics of it. Okay? And I understand what it is to sacrifice. I understand what it is to risk your life to defend your country and your community. And as an Israeli, this always comes as the first value. And when you haven't done that, and you are inexperienced, I mean, most of these ministers, these are the first time they've been holding these positions. Some of them are relatively new even to the Knesset, don't understand even the parliamentary work in the Knesset. But most important, even if they were inexperienced, but they are capable of making decisions.
Right, and we don't seem to have any, but this is an important thing on what you're saying, Sharon, because actually you started talking about UNRWA and the idea of the day after. Now, the war is raging for almost 9 months. There's a ceasefire deal, maybe or maybe not on the table, getting closer, not getting closer. Hamas, we said, is still in power. You started listing all of the things that make UNRWA bad, and we know that it has harbored terrorists in their own schools and in their homes. And here we are. We want to think about replacing decisions being made, but who is going to do it? Is there a replacement for UNRWA the day after? Does that even exist? Are we moving toward it?
We need to make a decision. And this government is incapable of making decisions, so they're not making a decision about UNRWA either. Okay, they're just continuing the same way they've done before. They have to make a decision about UNRWA, and I believe there's only two choices. We cannot go back to what was before the 7th of October because we know UNRWA has paved the way to the 7th of October massacre. We know it's been compromised by terrorists. It's a corrupt organization that's controlled by terrorists. So we need to make a decision. Either there's going to be an international organization that's going to hold control, okay, and it's going to make the decision, and it's going to supply the government services that the Palestinians need, like UNRWA does. Or we acknowledge UNRWA for what it is. This is not a refugee organization. It has nothing to do with refugees, but it is a Palestinian organization that provides governmental services to Palestinians. And if there's an international committee, okay, by Western powers with some Arab powers and countries who want to take part of it, that include Israelis and Palestinians as well, who are going to manage it and see in a, with oversight and with proper management and with foreign management to make sure that there isn't a takeover of terrorists, that the monies are not being funneled to terrorist organizations,
then maybe
that
we
there's
could,
no corruption.
Right.
Then we can majorly reform this Palestinian organization until maybe in 2, 3, 4 generations, when there's a Palestinian leader that wants to take care of the lives of these people, that might want to take this organization and turn it into something that can provide to the Palestinians.
So I want to jump to Einat about that, because Sharon, what you're saying is actually, again, very important. Is there going to be ever in a generation, in a couple years? I mean, it seems kind of far off. Einat, I want to jump to you because you did dozens or more interviews with Hamas terrorists in the past. You have an understanding about their mentality. We have seen their very disturbing videos just that have come out in recent weeks and months of the testimonies of some of the terrorists from October 7th. They talk about admitting to raping and slaughtering women and children. Some of these prisoners are civilians. They are not actually Hamas terrorists who came in garb. They're not part of the military wing. So can we ever, Einat, make peace with these people? Is there any civilian population in Gaza even to work with? And if not, as Sharon says, is there a way that we can change that?
So at the moment, the entire Palestinian ideology is committed to the destruction of the Jewish state by whatever means. It has its more extreme forms, less extreme forms, but there's no difference in terms of the goal. Over 20 years of searching for Palestinians who will openly and publicly recognize the equal, not superior, not inferior, the equal right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their historic homeland. Over 20 years, I only ever met such 3 Palestinians. So the view should be the following. We need to have the kind of leadership that says morning, afternoon, and night. The day that the Palestinians end their century-long war against Zionism, the day that they have a constructive vision of wanting to live next to the Jewish state rather than instead of it, meaning that they understand that they are not refugees, they have no right of return, when they get to that point, they will find that the people of Israel are willing and ready to live with them in peace side by side, but not a minute before. And once we make that declaration that both makes it clear what the vision is and what needs to be done, then we need to move forward to do 2 things. First, to undo as much as possible, it's not all in our control, but to undo the fuel that underpins the Palestinian vision of no Jewish state. UNRWA is a prime example. Qatar, any money that even flows to the Palestinian Authority without it kind of changing its ideology, it all has to stop, and we need to campaign for that. And then we need to bring in whatever Arab and Muslim powers are willing to help Palestinians become a people who want to live next to the Jewish state rather than instead of it, however long that takes.
I think that we need to end. This has actually been somewhat depressing, I think, for us to be able to sit and to have this conversation and to talk about that we're not actually winning the war. We're all mothers trying to raise our children, having raised our children in this country, and it's a very intense state. So as a final sentiment, can each of you share a little bit of advice about how you want to how you should talk to children about the war, help them to make it through? Sharon, take really a minute, and then Einat.
Well, I think this is something that's going from generation to generation, and it's very difficult. I mean, my three babies are babies, and it's very difficult. So we're trying to shelter them from it, but we need to talk about the history and the generation of persecution of Jews. It's not going to go anywhere. We've just seen the incredible rise of anti-Semitism all around the world. It's not gone. It's still live and it's still kicking. And that's what we need to talk about, because we have to prepare the next generation for their mission of survival.
Einat, what do you say?
Like Sharon, it's mostly about sheltering them and allowing them to continue a normal life as much as possible. But when they are more interested, then yes, definitely go through the history, through the triumphs, through the challenges, and ultimately focus on both the joy and suffering of being Jewish, that it is in many ways a more intense way of living for good and for bad.
So I want to thank you both very much. You know, as a mother and as a journalist and as somebody who's been living in this country, I think it's very important for us to feel comfortable to ask those difficult questions, to tell the truth about what's going on here, but also recognize that there is a better future and more hope. So that's all the time that we have this evening. I want to say thank you to our guests, MK Sharon Haskell and Dr. Neil Wilf.
Thank you very much.
Sure. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv. Thanks for watching. Let's win this war and bring the hostages home.